Okay, all right. Then let's get started. For those who don't know me, I'm Stephen Chen from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. I'll be helping Professor Furco with this session. Before I pass the time to Professor Furco, I should spend just a tiny bit of time to introduce him. I'm not going to go over his official biography because everybody can read it. Professor Furco is at the Associate Vice President at the University of Minnesota. I'm not going to go over those things, but let me just tell you a little bit about how we got associated with Professor Furco. When PolyU got started seriously with service learning, we were really new to the field and we were scrambling around trying to find things to read, tools to use. And very soon we got introduced to the work that Professor Furco has been doing. And we then realized that there was a whole ton of material that we could draw on. And so we were very, very thankful. Over the past 10 years, we got to know him very, very well. One thing that I want to just bring up is he is probably one of the very few people who truly has a global perspective on service learning. I remember once I followed him around the world and he brought me to Senegal in West Africa. If not for him, I would never be, I cannot imagine, I would be like, in Senegal. And we attended a conference on service learning, which was not called service learning over that part of the world. And they speak French, which I could hardly understand. And then in another occasion, he got me a connection, and then I ended up in Argentina attending another service learning conference attended by 600 people who all spoke Spanish, which I also couldn't understand. So it's really amazing because it's a fruit of Professor Furco's work, and that we begin to realize that we here in the so-called Asia Pacific region, we are trying to catch up in service learning. We have our own idiosyncrasies. And then in the United States, they are probably, we can call them the big brother in terms of experience in service learning. And their philosophy has been influencing a lot of people. But in different regions, people do things a little bit differently. And then in Europe as well, they don't have a lot of credit-bearing courses, but they do service learning anyway in their own way. These communities don't necessarily speak to and understand each other very, very well. But Professor Furco is one of those people who have been tirelessly running around the world, understanding this different communities, trying to bring people together. So, and that's why he is here today. So without further ado, I will pass the time to Professor Furco to tell us this story. Professor Furco, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Chan. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for that very kind introduction. It's a really wonderful pleasure to be with all of you, albeit virtually, for this International Symposium and Expo on Service Learning and Social Responsible Global Citizenship. And many congratulations to the wonderful staff at Hong Kong Polytechnic University for all the work that you do, the offerings that you've been having over these last several years, the wonderful quality service learning work that you do, opportunity to exchange this knowledge in this international forum and across these borders and educational levels. So thank you very much. And thank you all for joining this session, an inspirational session, as it's called, focused on the transformational power of service learning. And so in this session, we take a global perspective, as Professor Chan mentioned, on the power of service learning and the aspects of service learning that make this pedagogy, this educational practice, transformational in regards to students' perspectives about them, transformations about themselves, about their academic work, about their communities, about the world. And in thinking about this session as an inspirational session, I wanted to find a way to capture the aspects of service learning that inspire us, that make it a truly powerful pedagogy that it is. And it's truly remarkable, I would say, to see service learning continue to grow and become more prevalent within educational systems across the globe, as Professor Chan was mentioning. Despite a relative lack of administrative or financial support that is given to service learning relative to other educational practices. And also despite the fact that we have been in the midst of a global pandemic during which we have not been able to be in community with each other, to interact in person, to really have those fundamental relationships that are so essential for service learning. And the sensing and the feeling and the seeing of communities, of people, of experiencing firsthand what is happening. And so that's very important for service learning. And despite the fact that we have not been able to be together in person, we still have seen this growth of service learning globally, thanks to, I think, some creative and innovative ways that we've used technology over the last 18 months. So what I hope to do during our time together is to be inspired by the inspirational aspects of service learning. When we compare service learning to other similar and related practices, I think service learning offers us more. It inspires us more and has a greater potential and power to transform us than some of our kindred educational practices. So I just want to say that in my presentation, I use the term transformation very loosely. Indeed, as we will see here today, service learning can be transformational for students. It can be transformational for teachers, for community partners, for our educational institutions themselves. And I use the term transformation to mean impact and change in individuals' perspectives and attitudes and ways of looking at themselves and others. And I want to point out that I want to recommend an excellent study on the issue of transformation as it pertains to service learning, especially in ways that international service learning experiences promote transformational learning. This study is one recently completed by Cindy Lam, who works at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and as part of her dissertation work at the University of Hong Kong, she completed this wonderful, excellent study that provides a rich and deep conceptualization of transformation that relates to the true essence of the term as it pertains to service learning. And I highly recommend you read her wonderful study. It's really excellent. Earlier this week, I participated in another international global conference, and one of the presenters made a remark that there are many people with high levels of education who are not really educated. And he was saying that there are, individuals take a lot of classes, taking a lot of classes, graduating from high school or the university, getting a degree or two, does not necessarily mean one is educated. And I reflected on this comment quite a bit. And I think to me, what he was saying was that there's a difference between conducting schooling, which is delivering content and delivering the curriculum, and conducting education, which is the process of growing minds, of critical thinking, of habits of the heart, of developing knowledge for advancing our common humanity. And there are certain educational practices that do promote developing educated individuals who not only know things, but individuals who are socially responsible global citizens who contribute to making the world a better place. And this speaks to not just being smart about academic content or having technical skills, but it's also about developing a set of behaviors, attitudes, critical thinking skills, perspectives, a mindset, if you will, about how we think about the world and our role in it. as well as capacity to take positive action for the betterment of society. And I believe service learning is one of those pedagogies, one of these pedagogies, instructional practices that provide a true education and not just schooling. Indeed, it is an effective educational practice, as the research and science has told us. And so when we think about these various experiential learning practices, and these are very familiar to us, a lot of them focus on very similar things like project development, student skills development, problem-based, problem-solving experiences. However, for me, service learning really stands out. And why is that? Well, the research has found that transformational, impactful learning occurs when educational practices contain 7 elements. Most of these elements, these 7 elements of impactful and transformational learning, are found among these various experiential learning pedagogies listed here. And while experiential learning practices contain one or more of these 7 elements, a study by the Office of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, found that among experiential learning pedagogies, these, service learning was the only one that contained all 7 elements. And this is what contributes, I believe, to the transformational power of service learning that is not typically found in the other forms of experiential learning. So as we develop our own practice of service learning, I think let's think about these 7 elements that I'll share in just a moment. And I believe that when we encounter truly transformational and inspirational service learning, it is because these 7 elements are in full force. So the 7 elements center on how students experience service learning activities. I know when I develop my service learning courses, I think about these experiences and these 7 elements and try to hone them and try to make sure that they're part of what the service learning experiences are about. So to be clear, these 7 elements that I'm talking about are not the high impact service learning programmatic activities or factors that we all know, like reflection, duration, student voice, mutual beneficial partnerships. Those are all important for high quality service learning practice. What I'm talking about are aspects of service learning as a pedagogy that make service learning educational, and I would say inspirational as well, and that promote this powerful transformational experience for students. So let's begin, and I'll try to get through these as quickly as possible. And what I'd like to do is give some examples, some actual service learning examples to exemplify them in the process. So the first one is a very obvious one, and one that we see in all kinds of experiential learning activities. The first element of powerful transformational learning is when students are actively engaged in the experience. Okay, we know this very well, and we know it very well in service learning. So this is very obvious. And what's important about this is that active learning is sometimes seen primarily through the lens of activities, where students are doing something physical, doing an assignment, engaging in discussions, completing hands-on experiences, conducting a project. That's how we typically think of this. But actually, there's a difference between actively engaging students in experiences, and students engaged in active learning. And so true active learning is about creating student-centered spaces that provide students with meaningful and relevant hands-on experiences. So active learning occurs when there is action that has meaning. We understand why we're doing the activity. It's relevant. it's contextualized, and there's a purpose behind it. So we can engage in discussions and projects, but if we don't know why we're doing it, what the purpose is, what the meaning behind it, if we don't find it relevant, it's not active learning. It's an active experience, but not active learning. So let me share an example of service learning about this. So in rural Latin America, there are a lot of areas where students' access to books, to reading, to literacy is very low. And many do not have computers. They have to share computers. The internet is not very reliable. They do not have a lot of books. And students' literacy rates are severely below the national average in many parts of Latin America, in these rural areas. And secondary school students, as part of their, a group of secondary school students as part of their reading and language arts program, really thought about their younger years and said, you know, we wish we had mentors who mentored us and helped us, encourage us to read. And so what they did was they decided they were going to work with the local elementary school to get more students to be involved in reading. And so they wanted to be role models to these elementary school students. And of course, they needed to get books. They collected books. They found age-appropriate books and decided that they would bring these books to the elementary school, which was about 1 kilometer away. So how are they going to do this? Well, they decided to build a mobile library. They put these bookcases together on wheels, and they wheeled this to the local elementary school about 1 kilometer away. Now, I accompanied the students on one of these trips. And as they were pushing this bookcase down this dirt road, there were peers who were not in school, who were out there, and they were mocking these students. They were laughing at them. They were pointing to them. And these students who were pushing this bookcase held their head up high and just kept on going and ignored them. And were so dedicated to getting to that elementary school. And when they arrived at that elementary school, they were met with excited students who wanted them to be read to, who wanted to work with them, and they were excited to have these high school students there to be their mentors, to encourage them to read. And it was really inspiring to see this happening in this rural area where there are very few resources, and the students developing these resources to make it happen. Then the students roll this cart back, this mobile library back to their high school, again, past those students who were those young people who were laughing at them. They held their head up high. They knew these young people knew they were doing something important, something meaningful, something that was going to have an impact. And so what made this an active learning experience? And so when the students got back, you know, they reflected on how important it was for them to do this. It was an active learning experience because there was purpose behind it. It was student-centered. The students decided. They developed the project. They collected the books. They built the bookcase. They moved forward. They had the leadership. It was meaningful. It was relevant. It was contextualized. And it's these factors that make it active learning and not just an active experience. And so why was this inspirational? I think it's because the students were not ashamed to be in front, to go past their peers. And peer pressure is so strong in high school. But yet these students forewent that. They went beyond that in order to do what they felt was so important. And that to me was very, very inspirational. So active engagement is the first element. The second element is also one that's very obvious, and that has to do with the work. High impact learning happens when students' learning experiences are collaborative. And we know this as well, another obvious thing. Service learning, of course, is built on partnerships with faculty members, community organizations, students working together. It's about connectivity among students, teachers, faculty, community partners, students with each other, faculty and students together. This is fundamental. However, just like active experiences is not the same as active learning, collaborative work goes beyond just cooperative learning. True transformational learning happens when collaborative experiences are deep, when those involved in the enterprise are engaged in common goals, where there are mutual benefits, where there is reciprocity and a sense of teamwork, and where each individual is contributing something and makes a difference to the collective. That's what collaborative work is really all about. So think about an orchestra. If the oboe doesn't play that day, the music will sound different. It will be qualitative differently because that oboe is contributing something. If the violin comes in at the wrong time or plays the wrong notes, that is going to affect the overall experience and the collective work that's done. And so part of collaborative work is not just working together. It's about the contributions that each person or each individual or group makes towards the outcome of the collective work. And so when not everyone is contributing, it's not true collaborative work. And students do not ultimately transform if their contribution is not included, is not recognized. So let me give you an example. Following some floods that many places have been experiencing, there have been a lot of efforts to rebuild homes. And this has been done through collective efforts, that no one individual can get up and do this singularly. And it involves multi-sectoral operations to make this happen. So in this case, we had students in architecture and design school at the university work with the residents who were affected by the floods to say, we want to rebuild your home. What kind of design can we incorporate that would be helpful to you? They work with the city and the counties and the provinces to be able to get those permits that are needed to redesign the homes. They also worked with engineers. They worked with the law enforcement to help them clear the areas, traffic flow and all that, so the homes could be built after the floods. They worked with public health students, who were testing the water and the soil, and natural resource scientists. This was multi-sectoral, different groups working together in concert to make this happen. This wasn't just a project where people showed up one day and made it happen. There was a lot of coordination, and every individual's or group's contribution made a difference. So what made it collaborative was the fact that there was common goals, mutual benefits, cooperation, reciprocity, and unique contributions. And again, when these kinds of collective actions and experiences are in service learning, we see that transformation happen. When we're just going through the motions of the activity, then we're not necessarily seeing those transformations. That's the second element. The third element we know that affects transformation, and when is present, we see transformational learning, is when the activities are done through a constructivist lens. So high impact learning when constructivist approaches are used. As you know, constructivist refers to the theory that individuals construct knowledge rather than passively taking in information. Individuals rely on their experience of the world, and we reflect on these experiences. So in practice, constructivist instruction moves instruction from the teacher sharing knowledge or information with students to the students constructing their own knowledge. And high quality service learning practices have strong constructivist practices incorporated in them, which a growing body of research suggests contributes to service learning's power as a transformative and powerful pedagogy. An easy way to describe this is, for example, I could say, this is an impressionistic painting, and here are the 15 elements that make it impressionistic. Or I can use a constructivist approach and say, this is an impressionistic painting. Can you tell me what makes it impressionistic? Now students, you as the student, have to construct your knowledge around that. And service learning is embedded in service learning are constructivist practices and pedagogies which really affect its power and its power for transformation. So in this example I'll share, this is a course on entrepreneurship, and it's offered as part of an organizational management studies program at a university. And through this university course, students conceive, launch, and operate a real business. And students gain hands-on experience with all aspects of business: strategies, sales, marketing, finance, accounting, operations, all sorts of things. So students in this course are asked to design and prototype and develop a product for a particular that meets the needs of a specific population. So a group of students in this course decided to create a product that supports young people with autism. And so they began to learn more about the condition and specific kinds of activities and situations and behaviors that are helpful to young people with autism. So the students learned that many young people with autism are in constant motion. They're constant moving, their arms, their legs, their hands, their fingers. They also learned that autistic children respond to touch, to hugging, which tend to soothe and comfort them. And the students in the course began to consider a product that they might develop and support autistic young people, while also making the product very functional and useful. And in turn, they designed what is called the Nestle Pack. It's this blue backpack. And this backpack was designed to mimic comforting, to the tightness of it. It's to mimic comforting. And the backpack contains various pockets and manipulatives that the wearer can hold and roll around in their hand, and pockets and pouches for including various other accessories that the wearer might need throughout the day. So after designing and prototyping and testing the backpack, the students were able to receive a patent, a license for this that gave them the sole rights to it. They raised money, they secured donations, and were able to prototype and create 50 of these that they then gave away to schools to distribute to autistic young people at the school sites. So what makes this constructivist? Well, we can say that the experience was created by the students. It was student generated. It was students applied their creativity. They had to utilize higher order thinking skills, had to ideate, had to come up with different models and try them out. They had to prototype it, create the models, physical representations, and they experimented with it. So this was all created by the students in their minds. The teacher didn't say, this is how you do it. The students created that. That's the constructivist approach. And And this is very inspirational too, as the students could have sold them and made money, but they gave them away. They raised the money, they developed it, and they gave them to the schools. And they did it with the young person in mind who gave feedback, saying, this isn't working for me. And they modified it and redesigned it in the needs and in the interest of the young person. So that's the third one. The fourth element, so along with active, along with being collaborative, along with being constructive, high impact learning happens when the learning activities are empowering. They empower the individual. So the power of service learning lies in when service learning students are able to build their self-esteem, their self-efficacy, to be empowered to do the work. I got involved in service learning because of an experience I had when I was working in primary and secondary schools, when I saw the power of service learning, of empowering young people. And I was a middle school vice principal who was responsible for discipline. They came to my office when they were misbehaving. And I saw amazing transformations in students when they got involved in service learning experiences. The students who were in my office for discipline problems were now the ones staying after school to work on their experience, on their service learning. They would come up to me and say, Mr. Furco, look, I did this. Look at what I did. They were very proud of that work. And I saw amazing transformations in those students. And I knew that there was something to this service learning that we could not capture and were not capturing in the classroom. And what that was the sense of empowerment of students feeling like they could make a difference, that they had something to contribute and could contribute. And so here's an example of what it might look like in service learning. So in Western Argentina, in Latin America, there's a group of 12-year-olds in San Miguel School who were exploring history of their land as part of the history curriculum. And the area of which they live is very dry and barren. And the local residents mostly are part of the Huarpe Indian people, Indian tribe. And they live in poverty, and they suffer from a lack of abundant food and water. And a lot of the students have never seen a field that grew crops. Their family lives mainly by raising goats and producing handicrafts. That's how they make their living. And in the study of their land, the students came to learn that 25 years earlier, the land was very fertile, grew a lot of crops like corn and other crops. And the students start to say, well, why now is the land so dry, so barren, when it used to grow all these crops? Is it global warming? What is happening? Well, what they learned was 20 years earlier, the water they had was diverted to the capital and to the emerging wineries, vineyards for the emerging wineries, which decimated their water supply. And so these students said, we want to reclaim our water. So these students made a case with the province. They built aqueducts and reclaimed their water. They built these aqueducts that carry the water back to their community. They also brought direct water access to local residents who have to rely on collecting water from the town's only well. And they planted various vegetables, various fruits, various plants that now can get watered and become a food source for these, for this community. And it's really about advancing the residents' capacity for nutritious and saleable grains and vegetables. So what makes this experience empowering? Well, it's very obvious. Students giving this opportunity to be self-efficacious, to build their self-esteem, to ability to change and affect change, and the power to make a difference. It's inspirational that students took this on themselves. Remember, these were 12-year-old young people who did this. And I want to thank Professor Maria Nieves Tapias for sharing her story and this information with us. So, empowerment is so important. The fifth element we need for powerful transformation experiences is when learning expands our boundaries. One of the things I want to highlight here is that we're not just talking about physical boundaries. We're not just talking about locations. What we're talking about are different kinds of boundaries: cultural, religious boundaries, political boundaries, attitudinal boundaries, creative, cognitive boundaries. It's about moving us outside of our comfort zone, experiencing new, unfamiliar things, experiencing the other, so to speak. It's experiencing other beliefs, other points of view. And so an example of this is what was a university course called Jail Course. And this was an opportunity for students to overcome negative stereotypes through learning about and interacting with others who are different. And in this case, individuals who are incarcerated. And the curriculum was co-developed by the faculty member and the Department of Corrections. And the efforts were made to ensure students' experiences of understanding legal issues incorporated into the course and had to accommodate the lifestyles and the experiences of the inmates. So students had to take some training. They had to take training on criminal thinking, self-defense. They had to submit to a background check, follow a dress code, learn what procedures to follow while in jail, such as emergency procedures and hostage situation management, if you can imagine. So while at the jail, the students were assigned an inmate, designed the inmate's goals, focusing on developing computer skills, the inmates' computer skills. They developed lesson plans and understanding the skill level of the inmate and what some hopes and desires were in the inmate in terms of how they might use those computer skills, perhaps for a job, perhaps for other kinds of activities. The inmates were encouraged to write to their families, to send cards, and to use their computer skills in this way. So the activities that the students were engaged in were about really understanding the experiences of others who perhaps they would not normally interact and perhaps had stereotypes about. And so here are some of the quotes from the students. This is one. Throughout this class, I've learned that jails can be places for rehabilitation, healing, and change. I've learned that it is easy to fall into the wrong path and get difficult to get out. I've learned that people who make mistakes should always be forgiven and encouraged to do better. I've learned that we should never give up on people and instead give them and society hope for the future. For this student, it was a very different mindset than how this particular student entered the experience and how they thought about prisoners and inmates. Another student said, before this class, I, like most people, thought everybody in jail was a bad person and must deserve to be there because of what they had done. I now have an entirely different outlook on the inmates. They are just people, and somehow along the way, they made a mistake, some small, some larger than others. That doesn't make them bad people. That makes them human. So it's these kinds of transformational, powerful experiences that are very difficult to capture in the classroom. And this notion of expanding the boundaries that makes learning transformational and which makes service learning powerful because many service learning experiences expand students' boundaries. And I want to give a quote, I want to share a quote from one of the inmates who said, "I want to thank all the students that came to help us learn a little more about using a computer. For me, it was more than just learning a few tricks on the computer. More important is that I have been able to spend time and energy looking toward the future and focusing on the positive things in my life. I've also gained confidence in myself and in my ability to continue to grow and learn. I could not ask to be placed in a better environment, all things considered. You bring light to dark places. Thank you." So it gave this particular inmate some hope, some ways of looking to the future and really changing perhaps a sense of their plight. And so I'd like to thank Dr. Duffner and Dr. Diaz, Kelsey, and Ashley for their work, sharing their work with us. So expanding boundaries is the fifth element. The sixth element is powerful learning, transformational learning happens when the learning is personalized. When we connect as individuals and see personal connections to what we're learning, we invest ourselves more in the learning, and it's more transformational, meaningful for us. We know that we can have 6 or 8 students in the same exact service learning experience. Each student will get something different out of it based on the personal connections that they make and how they make those personal connections. And here's another example, also from Latin America. This has to do with a blind student, Jose Miguel. He reads Braille and needs to get around the school. He's been integrated into a secondary school, but there's no Braille, no signposts at the school for him to find his way around. And in this powerful and inspirational example, we see how the student's personal experience engaged the entire class. It's personal involvement. So he attends this provincial college, college, not secondary school, in Santa Lucia. It's a suburban school in the province of San Juan in Latin America, in Argentina, which is generally under-resourced and poor. And he was integrated into the school, and he worked with some sighted students to create Braille signs and posters and materials. So what he did with the teachers was he taught sighted students Braille, to read Braille. And the Braille and the sighted students used their Braille skills to develop signs and posters that then they put around the school so that Jose Miguel and eventually other blind students could get around the school. This project then expanded to establish Braille signage in public buildings and shops across the town so that individuals who are blind could get around town, who could read Braille and get around town. They did this at bus stops, and they did this in a lot of other places. so to provide. And the sighted students learned Braille to be able to do this. So this is a way that everyone got involved very personally. It was a very personal experience that engaged and invested individuals. And last but not least, as I'm coming to the end of my time here for some questions and conversation, is that the seventh and final element that makes learning transformational is that learning is more powerful when it is authentic. Research has found that when learning is authentic, meaning learning is about things that really matter, that the learning is powerful. When I was conducting research on service learning, I was interviewing some teachers around service learning, asking them why they engaged in service learning, what impact they thought it had, and why they thought it was something that they wanted to use. And one of the teachers' comments stuck out for me, really made me reflect a lot. And she said to me, well, my waste paper baskets are empty. And I thought about it and I said, so your students clean your room and they empty your waste paper baskets. That's why I think service learning is useful. I said, no, that's not what I mean. When I say my waste paper baskets are empty, what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, my waste paper baskets were always full. And when I would look in them, it would be my students' work. I would spend a lot of time correcting their, providing feedback, correcting their work, and they would just toss it in the waste paper basket. But now my waste paper baskets are empty. And so I would say, well, why do you think that is? And she said, well, because students now take pride in their work. They care about the work that they do. They want to show it. They want to show it off. It's important to them. It's meaningful to them. And the reason, she said, is because they are doing real work for real people with real consequences. They're not just doing assignments for me. They're doing real work for real people with real consequences. This is authentic learning. And service learning is powerful because it's about authentic learning. It's doing the work for real people. And so my last example is that here in the US, we teach American history in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And in 5th grade, we teach a section on slavery in the United States. And usually the way we do this is we have a textbook, a chapter on slavery. The students work on the chapter. There's probably an exam. And then we move on to the next chapter, the next topic. In this 5th grade class, the students started to ask questions like, does slavery still exist? The teacher, being a constructivist good teacher, said, let's find out. So the students started to do some research, and they came across some places where slavery still exists. One of them was the Sudan. And in the Sudan, they learned that you can get kidnapped as a young person, and then your parents have to pay ransom. And this is still happening, like last week in Nigeria. Or these warlords come around and say, you owe me this amount of money. And the parents say, oh, we don't have that money. And they take your son or daughter as a slave. And these students start to learn about how these young people are made to walk miles in the desert, how they're abused and mistreated. And the students start to say, we want to do something about this. And so they decided to think about what to do. And so they start to say, well, can the parents ever get their students back? And the teacher said, let's find out. They found out that the parents can pay the ransom or pay the fine, buy back their children. And it's about 50 to 100 US dollars. And the students said, okay, let's raise some money. Well, what did they do? They raised $35,000 and freed over 600 children. And it didn't end there. They decided to write letters to people like Oprah Winfrey and Steven Spielberg, celebrities, to get them to raise attention. And then what they also did was they decided to go to Congress, the United States Congress, and testify that the government should be involved. And the teacher, Barbara Vogel, did this. And this became news. And these young people went to Congress and testified. And what they did was they got the US government to put pressure on the Sudanese government to find ways of getting these young people back from slavery. These were 8, 9, and 10-year-olds who did this. This is authentic learning, and this is what service learning is all about. So what I wanted to just say today was these 7 elements, when in our service learning experiences, create powerful learning transformational experiences. And service learning has these experiences. And this is what makes it, in my view, a superior pedagogy than other similar pedagogies that we see, experiential learning pedagogies, because it's the only one that often or almost always has all 7 of these essential learning components. When we talk about the power of service learning, these kinds of examples I gave you is what is possible. And had these things not happened, these transformations would not have occurred. I think these and other service learning experiences remind us that at the end of the day, our educational system is not just about learning content and facts, but it's about becoming educated and using our minds to make a world a better place in whatever ways we can. It's not always easy, but service learning can be one way to engage students of all ages, our teachers and our community partners in efforts to make education count. So as we develop our service learning work, whether it's at the university level or primary or secondary school level, let's remember to consider how these 7 elements are incorporated in our experiences so that the power and transformational aspects of service learning can be optimized. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer some questions in the time that we might have remaining.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor Furco. The stories that you quote are certainly very inspiring. In fact, we came up with quite a number of questions. But before I ask those questions, well, I'm going to ask that question, but let me just give you what I gather from the questions. I think from the questions and the responses from throughout the day, you obviously are very impressed by the stories and your experiences and the research. I think so do a lot of people who attend. However, we are faced with a different reality out there. We seem to be convinced by the transformational impact of service learning. We are believers. If this is the objective truth, why is it so hard to convince the people who manage the funding, the people who make the decision on curriculum, why is it so hard to convince them out there to control what we are allowed to do, the resources that we are allowed to have? What we have been keep on asking is, okay, well, these are nice stories, but where is the statistics which demonstrate this such great impact? Where is the evidence that this is really helpful in terms of students learning, impact to society, future earning power? That seems to be reality that we are facing. I'm kind of paraphrasing the questions I'm getting here.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. It's a very valid one. So I would say two things. First of all, there is a lot of evidence from research. There's more than thousands of studies on service learning, and a lot more that we don't know about. And very clear that shows when done well, service learning has potential to do a number of things: academic learning, content learning, personal, social development, career development, ethical, moral development, civic development. All those things are found in service learning. Not every service learning will do that, all those outcomes, but when service learning is designed very well, there is great evidence. I would turn the question back to those who are skeptical. And I talk about quality teaching. What I've talked about here is not about service learning, but what we know is impactful learning. These are things, these 7 elements that I mentioned that I demonstrated, these 7 things are about quality teaching and quality learning. When these 7 things are present, we know from research that has nothing to do with service learning that students achieve at a higher level. And learning is transformational. We know that from OECD and other studies, that when these things are in place, what we then did was we said, okay, what pedagogies, what instructional practices have these things? And what did we find? Service learning was the one that had all of these, was the only one when we looked at this. So I talk about quality teaching, that if we want high impact practices, if we want good outcomes, we want quality teaching, and we want to have these practices. And so we don't even have to talk about service learning necessarily. We want to do these things. And so I always say the goal is not to do service learning. The goal is to use service learning as a strategy to accomplish other goals we have. So if doing quality teaching and having high impact is a goal, our goals, then let's use a practice that helps us do that, and one of them is service learning. So we have a lot of research. The other thing I would say is that why are we all advocates and supporters? How did we get there? When I was a vice principal, I was very skeptical about service learning. When my principal came to me and said, Andy, I want all of our students to do community service, I thought these middle year students out in the community terrorizing the neighborhood, and I don't know about that. I'm not sure. But I saw for myself what it did. Those students who testified in front of Congress, Congress was laughing when they walked in. They're like, oh, look how cute they are. And I encourage you to watch this. It's on the internet if you can get it. They're so impressive. These young people, articulate. And the Congress was blown away, that expression. They were just so surprised because they saw it firsthand and it made a difference. So seeing it firsthand, I think, is really important. That's why the stories are important too. I don't know if that answers the question.
I want to corroborate with what you said, with our own experience at our own university. When we got started 10 years ago, most people in our senior management, they know very little about service learning. Even though we, as a school, we decided to do service learning. Even then, at that time, many of our senior management, they say, oh, I don't know what it is. But gradually, they become more and more people got converted. Part of what happened was some of them, they got involved. We try very hard to bring them along, let them see what the students are doing, give them a chance to do what the students are doing. Everybody who came along got converted. I think that supports what you were saying. Service learning is such a good pedagogy, but not a lot of people don't really know what it is. A lot of people, once they have experienced it, they buy in and they become supporters. So that's something we feel encouraged by. Now, I don't want to follow up with what you said just now. Service learning is not the ultimate goal. We are not just devoting our life to push service learning. We do service learning because it is a good education pedagogy. Can you share with us, from your experience of research, how service learning helps the students' studies in their own profession discipline? Do you have experience or data research to kind of support that service learning can be used to promote good learning?
You mean content learning?
Well, yeah, that's one possibility, I think.
Yes. So we've done random assignment studies where we put students in different sections of a course. Some sections had service learning, some sections did not. The content was pretty much the same. And the students who were in service learning scored better on the examinations. And that's been Marcus Howard King, that's been replicated, several times. That was political science, the first one. They've been done in different subject areas. So we've seen that. I would say, the results have been mixed. Sometimes the students do it equally well. Sometimes they don't do as well. But the preponderance of evidence seems to lean towards positive outcomes, academic outcomes for students. I would say the following. For the students who are already doing well academically, service learning probably is not going to make that much of a difference. But for the students who perhaps are not as motivated, not as engaged, don't have high self-esteem or self-efficacy, they're more likely to do better from service learning. Because where service learning really is powerful from the research is mostly on the personal and social development domains. So if I'm already, going to do well academically, service learning is not going to improve my grades or my academic outcomes. I'll probably do well anyway. But if I'm not doing so well, if I'm not as motivated, like, why am I learning this? I don't understand the relevance. How do I contextualize this to my personal life? Then service learning actually may help me see that connection, make those connections. And that's one of the 7 elements here. So that's where I think service learning does make a difference.
Right. We seem to have some experiences along that line as well. Now, the next question, I want to make it our final question because we are running out of time. It's a little bit politically sensitive, so it's up to you, how you would answer that question. But because since you are, I don't know, where you are safe, right? So it probably doesn't affect you as much as some of us. The question is, the elements that you talk about, those 7 elements that make service learning such a great pedagogy. If we are working in a politically authoritarian situation, highly restrictive, can that still be done?
With difficulty. It's acknowledged. Those students that I showed you, they weren't doing service learning. I mean, they didn't know they were doing service learning. They didn't call it service learning. When I heard about it, I said, that's service learning. They never called it that, right? They were just doing something that they felt they needed to do. Those 7 things can get tricky because they promote higher order thinking, critical thinking skills, problem solving, which in certain political climates, that's not encouraged. And so what we want to be able to do is to, I think, incorporate as many of these 7 elements as is possible, that can at least move us to high quality teaching and learning as much as possible. And sometimes it's, not able to do. There is a strand of service learning that has emerged. Critical service learning is one. There's service learning advocacy work, which is another activism kind of work, which is very politically charged. And even in our environment in the United States, it's problematic because suddenly now you're promoting a particular agenda rather than doing something for the common humanity and social, and so of course that brings up a lot of debates and what's common humanity. And so it could get very politically charged very quickly. And that's where some calibration has to be done, but it can be very difficult to do it under certain mindsets and governmental mindsets.
Okay, understood. Now I'm afraid I am forced to go back on my words. I have to make one final question available. Professor Yang, Professor Ben Yang, you were going to say something.
All right. Okay. Well, Andrew, first of all, thank you for sharing your thoughts and experience. That's very inspiring. I just want to ask you, you actually share about this the 7 elements, which I agree with you. I know it's difficult. If I ask you to name the top 3 out of these 7, which one would you put in the priority list? Well, just the first 3. It's difficult, I know, but then
right. I think, well, definitely active engagement of students, making sure that they're, active engagement. I would say then authentic learning, making it real, about real things, real issues. I can't tell you how many students have said, why do I have to learn this? So the more that they know and they sense it. And then I would maybe say have a constructivist approach.
Okay, thank you. Oh, well, I understand.
Yeah, I don't know.
All of those are important. I understand. But thank you for sharing your experience and your thought with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Thank you so much, Professor Furco. That has been very interesting and very inspiring for us. Of course, there are still lots of questions that we didn't get to ask, but I'm sure we are going to be seeing you again some other time. So let us continue, or on the side, we can continue to talk. Now, I've been asked to announce that the poster and video session will restart at Gather Town from 4:40, right? Hong Kong time, 4:40 Hong Kong time.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Furco.
Thank you.